We're going to start this puppy up. Clear, prop.
And welcome back to Tip of the Week, building the Affordaplane. This week we're going to start and complete our first component of the tail feathers. This is the fin, complete with hinges, and making our first bend with the tubing. So let's get started and see how this is done. In starting with our tail feathers, we're going to begin with the fin for the rudder. That's the stationary part in front of the rudder. It's the simplest one because it has only one bend, and that makes it simple. But our first step is to lay out some paper about 40 inches by 48 inches, something like that, no big deal, because we're going to trace out exactly what it is we're trying to match with the tubing. So this will be comprised of our 1-inch tubing. Now here is the pattern drawn out in full size. I won't take time here to explain how I transferred it from the plans to the full size, but if you're interested in how I did it and some tips to make it easy for you, please visit my Patreon site. The link is up in the description area of the video. On my Patreon site, I explain things like the tools I use and some of the techniques that are somewhat behind the scene, but if you're seriously interested in building, I highly recommend some of that information. We're also going to show how we worked with learning to bend using various tools, the ones that did not work and the ones that did work, for the goal of making this a very easy and straightforward process of making these tail feather parts with the curved tubing. We only have 3 tubes that make up the fin. 1 curved and then 2 that are absolutely straight. So this is going to be relatively easy as long as you don't get afraid of this curve. So we're going to use our bender. After we get that set up, we can go then and cut off the length until it matches our pattern up there. So let's go make this one and only bend for our fin. Now I knew it wasn't enough, and certainly it is not. So I need to put it back in the same spot at the 3-inch mark that I had it before and continue bending. And it made a little bit of difference. Now I have a little bit of trimming to do, but it has a slightly larger radius here. Not much difference, but it just shows you can play a little more, because basically I slipped down a little bit on the curve and bent some more, and it made it slightly larger. Not much. It's still clearly less of a radius than our 6-inch from the pizza board, but that looks just fine. 2 more straight pieces and we're essentially done with the tubing for the fin. So after the curved tube is done, that leaves us with just 2 other tubes. One here with a very simple straight cut at this end and a slight angular cut at this end, and then a straight tube here following the patterns. And that's really all we have to do. Then we're going to add 3 gussets, 1 at each of the intersections. Now, at this intersection with the angle, you can always use the tool like we've used before, a protractor, to get the angle, and then that makes it easy to draw a line on the tube and then cut it so that you get a very nice fit. And that goes the same with the opposite corner where we have a slight angle. By drawing a line across the top, marking the top, taking it to the bandsaw, and then following the line to get that very nice angle. And likewise, drawing a line, taking it up to your bandsaw, and cutting it leaves you with a very nice match here. Now, even before we start creating our gussets for the three intersecting locations, we need to install our hinges on this back post here. And the reason we want to do that now is that it's always easy to work on a flat surface than later when it's all joined up to the entire fin and then we have an entire structure to have to move around, because we want the hinges to be in a straight line. We're going to have three of them, one here, one towards the middle, and one at the bottom. So step one is taking your favorite block for marking center lines, and we want to mark the entire length, or at least at the ends and in the middle of the very top of the tube, which can be anywhere. Just make sure you hold the tube in place when you take your pen and mark from one end to the other. So we just need a line, straight line, somewhere on the tube, full length. So a little tip, I lock the tube in place with a clamp like this so that it cannot rotate while I'm shifting my block, to really make sure my line is staying straight all the way to the other end. Another thing we want to do before going much further is, after making our line along one side of the tube, we want to mark 90 degrees, or in other words, the top of the tube. So I'm going to place my block back under here, make sure I can see the line in there, and then use the other hole, which is exactly 90 degrees, and mark each end, a couple inches of each end of this tube, because we're going to need that line for our gusset to be perfectly perpendicular to our hinges. So just make another short line using your block on both ends of the tube. Okay, not sure you can see the line, but I've got a line the entire length of the tube. I marked an arrow pointing up so that I don't get this end reversed with the other, because this is a straight tube. And looking at our plans, our first hinge line is 2 inches from the top. So I'm going to measure 2 inches from the top and put a mark right across the intersecting line. With my 2-inch line, I'm going to go mark the next hinge line, which my plans show at 17 inches. So I'm going to come down to 17 inches and mark another line across the center line. And then the last hinge is 3 inches from the bottom. Now that we have 3 hinge lines located and labeled, let's assemble our hinges. Here are the hinges we're going to use. We're going to use a pair of them. Now, I got these hinges from the Affordaplane store, where they had a good price and they had exactly the components we need. These are stainless steel, got 3 3/16 holes, and the pivot part itself is another 3/16 hole. They've been pressed with a curve so that they'll sit on top of the pipe, on top of the tube real nicely, conforms to the surface of the tube. And we're going to use 2 of them like this. Now, the easiest way to get these positioned correctly is to set them up like this. I have 3 washers in between and a AN3 bolt with the nut on the end, and the idea is to hold them nice and straight and then tighten up the nut so they sit flat like that, because this is the way we're going to install them, and this will hold it nice and tight while we're positioning them for drilling. The way this is going to work is that on the other part that's going to pivot, in this case this will be attached to the fin that we're building. This side will be attached to the rudder, which we have yet to build, and it will go in something like this. So these 3 washers are spacing it just right so that these 2 pieces of the hinge can fit easily inside of there and still have a little bit of wiggle room. So we'll save these for our rudder, but this is what we want to place at each hinge location that we marked on our tube, and then we're going to use 3/16 rivets, stainless steel rivets, to hold it onto our tube. So let's go take a look at that. Here's one of the marks we made for a hinge line, and the idea there is that will be the center of where this is going to go, and the line is going to make sure we position this properly so it's not in the wrong spot, especially in relation to the other 2 hinges further up the line. That's why we drew this line in the first place. So it's going to be centered on this mark, and then the holes, I'll rotate that so you can see it. The line should go right down the middle of the holes. So we can mark those locations. I'll do a punch on that and drill a hole. I'll get 2 of them, one on each side, just right, and then I'll come back and use these holes to help me drill the rest of them. So we want to do the best job we can at just getting an accurate drilling with our goal of keeping the line down the middle. Just that simple. So these will be 3/16 size holes and then 3/16 stainless steel rivets. And once they're riveted in place, I can remove the nut and washers, and they'll be in just the right position. So we're going to repeat this 2 more times at the other 2 hinge locations. And now I'll drill through the rest of the holes and then rivet. And of course we can remove this to get access to the inner holes. And of course we want to remove these and deburr and then put them back on and rivet. And we just need to repeat this procedure 2 more times and we're done for now, for this one anyway. We have our hinges installed, and we are ready to think about making our gussets. We need 3 gussets, and of course we're going to create them for both sides. Let's review how we make our gussets. In our plans we have the layouts for the gussets, and if your printer is working in good shape as far as keeping things to actual size, then you can go ahead and print out. I printed out on cardstock and then cut them out and then use them to actually create the gusset. Our material is 90 thousandths, not the 125 that we used before, which was a bit thicker. This is 90 thousandths, and of course the holes are also marked. And confirm after cutting this out that the sizes are correct as per the plans. Otherwise you can hand draw it out. And notice it says we need to make 10 of these. This is going to be a popular gusset because it's a right angle. And we should also review the spacing of the holes to the edge and the edge to the tube that we're going to place it on. Let's take a closer look. Okay, this discussion is going to be generically for all of the gussets we place on all of the tail feather tubes. So I'll just point it out once so we don't have to repeat it every time. But what I'm referring to is the placement of the holes on the gusset and the placement of the gusset on the tube as far as exactly where it goes. We're dealing with a round tube, and of course we have a straight edge. Now our tube is 1 inch across. That's pretty obvious, which means any drilling has to be in the center of the tube, which is a 1/2 inch from either edge of the tube. Our gussets have the holes. Those holes need to go into the center. So we're always going to draw a line using our jig that we use for drilling lines on the top of the tubes. And those holes need to go directly into the center of the tube on those lines. Now the edge of the gusset is going to be a 1/4 inch from the edge of the tube. And by that I mean if I run an object up against the edge of the tube, the gusset is to go not all the way to the edge of the tube, but rather a 1/4 inch away. So there's a 1/4 inch gap between the edge of the gusset and the edge of the tube. And the holes are a 1/4 inch from the edge of the gusset. That's how you make the gussets. If you read the plans, they are to be centered a 1/4 inch from the edge of the gusset. And as we know, a 1/4 inch from the edge of the tube to the gusset and a 1/4 inch from the edge of the gusset to the hole is a 1/2 inch, and a 1/2 inch puts us right in the middle of the tube. So I bring this up. It is a little obvious, maybe not at first, but when placing gussets on these tubes, they don't go in some random location. They need to go exactly as I described. So if you make the gussets properly with the holes a 1/4 inch from the edge, then they will always go into the center of the tube, which is where they are supposed to go. And remember, we use a tool like this. We talked about this in a previous video for finding the very top center of the tube. So there's no question where that goes. So what's going to be nice is placing these gussets will always be a matter of finding the center line through the holes in the gusset for both tubes, because in this case we have one going this direction, and if the holes are to go in the center, they have to be centered. So that is our positioning before drilling and attaching these gussets in all cases. So we can fit and install our first gusset here. We're going to do the letter A, which is a 90-degree. Note that in all cases we're going to have 3 holes in each tube. 3 holes in each tube. So don't put these backwards, something like that. That would only give you 2 holes and 4 holes over here. We always want 3 holes in each tube. The other thing we want to do is make sure these tubes are perfectly in position. In other words, my line, in fact this can be very misleading, I can see the line in all different positions. We want this line straight up. Now the reason this keeps rolling over is because I have these hinges weighting it down, so I'm going to put a spacer underneath one of the hinges to keep this perfectly level. And this one here, you know, if we have to weight it down or whatever to keep it from shifting, but we want that line to be perfectly up. And then our goal, of course, will be then to set this up so that we see line in 3 holes and 3 holes. Get everything just the way you want it, and then you can go ahead and mark one or two of the holes to get things exactly right. The reason I do it that way is after I mark and drill, if anything has moved or I don't like the position of one of my marks or one of my drills, before I drill everything or mark everything, I can abandon that hole if I'm a little bit off, reposition and mark a different one. So in other words, do things in stages until you get it perfectly right. And then once you got two of them at minimum and clecoed in place, you can go then and use the drilling through the holes to get an exact fit. So we want 6 1/8 inch holes, and these will get 1/8 inch stainless steel rivets. So we'll work on one at a time. Now, be sure to deburr before riveting. I'm going to, in fact, hold off on the riveting and move to the next gusset to our left. That way there's still just a little bit of wiggle room in case we need to make some adjustments as we put the other gussets on. So we're going to repeat the same procedure with our F1 gusset over here and perform the same procedure. Now notice I have this wrong. 4 and 2. We want 3 and 3. So just be careful. And now we have 3 holes and 3 holes. Easy to make a mistake. Just do it before drilling, if at all possible. And now we can move to the third one. Now this last location is going to be a bit of a challenge compared to just throwing the gusset on top. And that is because, if you recall, when I bent the tubing, I didn't follow the pattern exactly because our radiuses are not identical to the ones that are drawn on the sheet. And what that means is that this tube comes in at a slightly different angle and meets this tube here. So that means that the F2 gusset, if we look real carefully with the lines on the very top of our tube, is slightly off. In other words, my angle comes out at a little greater angle than the one originally set up for on this. It's not a big deal, however. I'm not going to cut this out yet. I'm going to need to increase the angle slightly by the difference that I see going on here to come up with a perfect match between these two tubes. And one way to precisely set that up is to use our protractor. And I'm going to line up this edge with my top line and this edge with the top line and adjust it until I get it so that they both match up nicely. And with the camera angle that may look off, but that's right on. So this is the angle I want, not this angle here. You can see the difference between the two. So I'm simply going to redraw this on my aluminum using this angle. Let's take a look. Here's the original F2, and I simply traced this side, which is the side we're going to keep. And then if I put my protractor up here, we can notice the difference in what we need to draw. So I'm just going to redraw this up to that point and then connect the line with that. So nothing is difficult as long as you have the angle that you really want. And there's my new outline, and compare that to the original. We got that new angle. Now I'll have to put the holes into their proper location. And then we can cut it out and try it. And before cutting it out, I wanted to make sure the holes lined up, so I drilled out the holes. And it turns out it's a very nice fit. So I'll go ahead and cut this out, and remember we need two of them, one for the other side. Now here's the gusset drilled. This corner hole, be sure to not rivet. Did I say not rivet this hole? That's because this will be a 3/16 hole that will go all the way through. So we're going to wait until we get the other gusset on the other side, and we can then drill it all the way through with 3/16, because a bolt will go through there for a couple of attachment tangs, because this is the very top of our fin and it will be used with some cables. So mark it appropriately. Do not rivet this hole. So after deburring everything, we can rivet the entire side now, all the gussets on this side. And then once riveted, we can flip it over and add the gussets to the other side. Okay, this side is all riveted. I'm going to turn it over. And our job now is to put the same gussets on the other side. We need to mark our center lines if we haven't done that. And that will aid us in positioning the gussets. Now with all of the gussets riveted, we have our one hole here at the top. We want to drill this out to 3/16 and then go on the other side and drill 3/16 and see that we can go straight through. And there you go. The fin is completed, and eventually we will mount it in its final location. Until next time, back to building, and we're going to make more progress next time. We're done for now.